This video is a tutorial for tutorial 3b question 5. So in this question we're given this graph and we're asked to sketch a variety of transformations. So the graph you see here is y equals to f of x. We need to transform it into the graph of y equals to f of x minus a. So if I start with y equals to f of x and I transform that into y equals to f of x minus a, what I've actually done is I've replaced y with y plus a, if you like to think about it this way, and this will be a translation, a units in the negative y direction. So that means we're translating down by a units. So our original point here, this was a point 1 and then a over 2. So if we translate that down by a units, we're going to get this point here, 1 minus a over 2. Similarly, these 2 points here are going to move down. So where this was originally 1/2, 0, now we're going to have the point 1/2 minus a. This was the point 1.5, 0, so this is going to be the point 3 over 2 minus a. Now, our vertical asymptotes, x equals to 0 and x equals to 2, are not going to change. So, and also the axes are not going to change as well. So let me just draw the axes in, sorry. This may not be the neatest. It's a bit hard to draw straight lines on the computer. So I do apologize for that. So as I was saying, x equals to 0 remains. Our other asymptote, x equals to 2, also doesn't change because we're just translating down. There's no horizontal movement. What about this asymptote, which was y equals to a in our original? Well, we're now going to have the horizontal asymptote. That will move down by a units. It becomes y equals to 0. So what's our graph going to look like? Well, below it's going to look something like this. Same shape, but just translated down. And then above it's going to look something like this. Again, same shape, just translated down. And so what we can do now is we can delete that image behind it, I hope, and this should work out. Okay, so it didn't quite work out perfectly, but you can kind of see the shape of graph that we're going to get. So that's the answer for part 1. So for part 2, we instead have to sketch the graph y equals to f of 1 minus x. So this one is a little bit trickier because to get from y equals to f of x to y equals to f of 1 minus x, we actually need to do 2 transformations. I prefer to, so we need to change x to minus x and then x to x plus 1. So I prefer to do the x plus 1 first, otherwise the negative sign gets in the way when I try and do my transformation. So the intermediate stage is going to be y equals to f of x plus 1, swapping x with x plus 1. And as we know, this is a translation, 1 unit in the positive x direction. And then this next one, we're swapping x with minus x. And this is going to be a reflection about the y-axis. So, okay, let's start with the first one. Let's just translate everything 1 unit in the negative x direction. Well, the nice thing is, some stuff isn't going to move. For instance, my horizontal asymptote, y equals to a, that's still going to be here. So I'm still going to have this asymptote, y equals to a. Okay, what about my vertical asymptotes? Well, I've got them at x is 0 and x is 2. They're both going to move 1 unit this way. So where are they going to move? The first one will be here at x equals to 1. So x equals to 1. And the one at 0 is going to move 1 unit this way as well to x is minus 1. Sorry, straight lines are a bit difficult to draw. Okay, so we've got x is 1, x is minus 1. What about my points? Well, this point, 1a over 2, is going to become the point 0a over 2. Change color of pen, sorry. It's going to go here to 0a upon 2. This point here, which is a half 0, is going to go here, which is minus a half 0. And this point here, 3 over 2, 0, is going to go here to 1 over 2, 0. So this is still the intermediate stage. So I'm just going to draw this in first so that we can see this intermediate step. So this is roughly what my graph will look like now. But when I've drawn this in, you'll notice something. You'll notice that this graph is actually already symmetric about the y-axis. So that when I do the reflection, which is the second step, nothing actually happens. So you may not see it just yet, but if I delete away that background picture, you can see that this graph is actually symmetric about the y-axis. So that when I flip it, about the y-axis, nothing happens. So this is actually already the final graph, y equals to f of 1 minus x. This final one is the most tricky because we actually have 3 transformations to make here. So we start with y equals to f of x, and we end with y equals to a minus f of 2x. So what are our intermediate steps? Well, the easiest one to do first is probably y equals to f of 2x. So we're replacing x with 2x, which we know is a scaling parallel to the x-axis with scale factor a half. Then what about the next one? Well, we've got to do 2 things. We've got to get a minus sign in front of the f of x, and we've got to get an a. Easiest one to do next is probably y equals to negative f of 2x. Why? Because this is just a case of replacing y with minus y, which we know is a reflection about the x-axis. And then after you replace y with minus y, then we can do the replace y with y minus a. And then we move that a over and we get this. So this is actually a translation by a units in the positive y direction. So I haven't got space, but positive y direction. So we're going to do this bit by bit. This will take a while. So we're just going to follow a few points and a few asymptotes first before we actually do anything, before we try and draw the graph in. So let's look at this point here. This initial point is 1a over 2. So 1a over 2 is where we begin. What happens when I now replace x with x over 2? Well, that's going to mean that I'm scaling everything parallel to the x-axis with scale factor half. That means that everything gets closer to the x-axis. So this point at a half is going to become a quarter. This point at 1 is going to go to a half. And this point at 3 over 2 is going to go to 3 over 4. And my asymptote at 2 is going to go to be an asymptote at 1. Sorry, let me actually just erase those away. This part's going to be a little bit finicky because I'm going to be drawing and redrawing a lot. So I do apologize. So we get this asymptote, x equals to 1. And at the moment, everything would just look like a squeezed in version of the original. I still have my other original asymptote, x equals to 0. That one's not going to move. But it would just look like I'd compressed everything first. So that's what would happen after this. The y asymptote actually wouldn't change at all. But then we replace y with minus y. What's that going to do? That's going to do a reflection about the x-axis. So now everything's going to go topsy-turvy. So this asymptote at y equals to a, that's going to drop down here. That would drop down here to be at y equals to minus a. This would be my new horizontal asymptote. What about this point here? That would again flip over So at the moment it's at a half a over 2. Now we replace y with minus y, it means it's going to flip, where it would be at a half, still at a half, but negative a over 2. Right? And these points along the x-axis are going to remain invariant. So my whole graph, it's squished, then it's flipped. Then what's the last thing I do? The last thing I do is I translate everything up by a units. So actually, that asymptote I drew in earlier, y equals to minus a, move it up, it's now going to sit nicely along the line y equals to 0 along the x-axis. So y equals to 0 becomes my new horizontal asymptote. X equals to 0, x equals to 1 remain. What about these 3 points? They're all going to move up by a units. So the points along the axes are going to move up, and I have to be a bit careful here. Yay, got that working. So those points are going to move up by a units. So where are they going to be now? You'd have 1 point here at a half a over 2. You'd have this point here at a quarter a and 3/4 a. And you still keep your vertical asymptotes where they are. So what is this graph going to look like? Now that we've got all our axes and all of our points and asymptotes done, we can remember what we did. So firstly we squished it, then we flipped it, then we moved it up. So this is going to look something like this here, and this here, and in here it'll look like a squished version of what we had before. So again, please forgive me, it's not that easy to draw neatly. So something like that. I'll delete the graph behind and then label the points so it's a little bit easier to see. Yep, so that's what the graph is going to look like. And we remember the values for the points. This is the value 1 a over 2. Sorry, not 1, 1/2. This is the value 3/4 a, and this is the value 1/4 a. And that's what the graph of y equals to a minus f of 2x would look like.